All right, everybody. The next thing we're going to cover right now is, along with total warfare, one of the things in total warfare that we did against the Indians was to make sure that their food supply was completely decimated. And this really shows itself well on the Great Plains. One of the policies we came up with was, well, since the Great Plains Indian, which is about a dozen tribes, since they pretty much completely rely on the buffalo or bison as their food source, as their clothing source, and all these things, let's just kill them all. Okay? So there were 60 million buffalo, 66 million, I think is the number, in 1800. And by 1860, by 1890, there were only 600 specimens left in the entire United States. Okay? That's a very low number. So it was policy that any settler that went out west, went out to the Great Plains, that they killed as many buffalo as they could. Okay? Sometimes they ate the meat. Most times they would just skin the buffalo, or they would just let the buffalo rot out there in the Great Plains after they shot them. So the buffalo slaughters hurt the Indians most. Okay? By 1800, we have 65 million buffalo. Some say 66, some say 60 in the Great Plains. By 1866, there's only 37 left. By the time like I said, by the time 1890 rolls around, it's much less than that. Okay, so all right. So the railroad used to use buffalo to feed the Chinese workers. Now, one of the big things, like I said before, about Manifest Destiny and getting millions of settlers out there was to build the railroads. Okay, well, the cheapest source of labor was coming from China. The Chinese would come here, and because white Americans did not want to hire them, they had to work for a much reduced rate. Whereas the average white man working on the railroad would make $1 a day for about a 16-hour day, the average Chinese person would only make 25 cents a day. Okay. So at the end of the day, let's say you have 1,000 Chinese Chinese railroad workers. They would shoot 2 or 3 buffalo, slaughter them, barbecue them, and that was their meal for the day. Okay, so that got rid of a lot of buffalo as well. If you look right here, this mound that you see on the screen, okay, all this stuff right here, those are all buffalo skulls from the slaughtered buffalo in the Great Plains. There came an industry that grew through this whole thing, and it was the fertilizer industry was really ramping up because of this. They had people whose only job was to drive around the Great Plains in wagons and pick up buffalo bones. Now those bones are full of vitamins and minerals, mostly minerals actually, and they would grind them down to a fine powder and mix this in with manure, and that would be a very rich source of fertilizer. So you see this picture right here, the estimates are that there's anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million buffalo skulls in that one little pile right there, that big pile I should say. Now, this guy right here is William F. Cody, okay? Call him Buffalo Bill. He killed more buffalo than any other person alive, okay? One time, in fact, Buffalo Bill killed 4,300 buffalo in 8 months. Later on, he's going to go on, after the buffalo slaughter's over and there's no more buffalo, basically, he goes on to start his Wild West show, which is a bunch of trick shots with rifles and stuff like that. And he would actually hire some of the real Native Americans to participate. Crowds from all over America would watch this as they came through town on the railroad. They would have a show, and the cowboys would have blanks in their guns whenever they were doing the fighting with the Indians, and the Indians would shoot arrows with rubber tips on them and stuff like that, okay? But anyway, so moving on from that, Buffalo Bill, the way he made a lot of his money was by betting, okay? What he would do is he would take his lever action repeating rifle, it's a Henry rifle, and he would make a bet while riding a train. So he'd walk up to some gentleman and he'd say, I bet I can shoot more buffalo from one stop to the next, which is maybe, 10 miles or something like that. And whoever gets to shoot the most buffalo, they win the bet. So he just rode the railroads, shooting buffalo after buffalo after buffalo. And in those 8 months that he did that, he racked up 4,300 kills, okay? His record was something like 20 buffalo in 1 mile, with the train moving at like 50 miles an hour. So you do the math on that one. That's pretty fast shooting, okay? All right, so the Sioux are finally beaten in 1876, and Sitting Bull, which is their medicine man, their chief, he moves up to Canada to try to escape the U.S. government. As the Indians get beaten down more and more, a policy grows in America, a new policy, which is one of your vocabulary words. It's called assimilation. Now, assimilation is when the government will force Native Americans to act like white settlers, okay? So the main thing they had to focus on was the way that Indians viewed land. Indians viewed land as if it did not belong to them, and they were simply protecting it and looking after it for the gods. They did use resources from the land, but they never overdid it like the white men did. So in order to rip Indian culture apart completely, the U.S. government enacted the Dawes Act of 1887, okay? This is on your test. It's in green right there. You need to know this, okay? This is going to be a leap question actually later on in the year, so this is something you need to remember the rest of the year. So, white men lived on their own land. They had a claim, right? Registered with the government. Well, the Indians, it all used to belong to them. But then the white men came in and just gave them the Great Plains. And then once that was deemed valuable, they took away a lot of that land, millions of acres, and gave them reservations where the whole tribe lived on one patch of land. The Dawes Act splits it up even more. What they do is they take those Indian reservations and they break it up to where each individual male Indian over the age of 18 gets 320 acres of land for ranching or farming. And the rest was sold to settlers and the railroad for equipment that would go to the Indians. Well, guess what? The Indians never actually got the money. The government just sold the land off, the leftover land, and they kept the money, okay? It went in someone's pocket. But let's talk about the Dawes Act though, okay? In particular, you get your 320 acres as a young Indian man, but there's a stipulation. You have to build a house on it. It kind of sounds like the Homestead Act, right? And you have to improve the land, which means that if you fail to build a house on it, which means you're staying put, not roaming around the Great Plains like you used to, then you lost your land. And that land would then revert back to the government. So this is a way to make it where Indians didn't live together in tribes anymore. They were spread out, and your nearest neighbor might be a half a mile away. So there's two reasons this was done. One, if I take an Indian and make him stay on one piece of land and improve that land, he's going to start thinking, this is my land, not this is our land. Okay, so that makes them think more like a white settler. That is assimilation. But the other thing is this. Let's say that this tribe has an uprising and they're trying to fight the U.S. government. They're not compacted into one village anymore. Now they're spread out all over the reservation. It's much harder to defend against an army that's coming into your reservation if you're spread out and they could take you out one family at a time. That was the other sinister act, part of the Dawes Act, okay? So the point of the Dawes Act was to assimilate the Indians by making them act like white settlers and farm. That's the answer on the test, okay? All right. Government enforced assimilations which threatened the communal lifestyle of the Indians. This is the exact wording for the answer on the test. Threatened their communal lifestyle, okay? See how it's in bold? I'm pointing at the exact answer on the test. All right, let's move on from that, okay? And let's talk about Carlisle Boarding School. So the most significant boarding school for Native Americans was Carlisle. It's in Pennsylvania. And what they did is they take Indians off the Great Plains and from all over America, and they ship them to Carlisle, and they cut their hair. They make them stay inside. They don't go hunting anymore. They teach them farming. They teach them English. They teach them Christianity. And this is all done in the name of saving the Indian, okay? So the motto of Carlisle Boarding School was kill the Indian and save the man. So in other words, inside of every savage Indian, this is what they were saying. There's a white man just begging to get out. That he's in there, you just got to kill the Indian part of it. So while they're at Carlisle Boarding School, these Indians were not allowed to practice their religion. They were not allowed to speak their language. They weren't even allowed to wear their own native clothes. They had to wear suits. So if you look, this is a typical Native American, right, from the Great Plains. That's the same man, okay? If you look at him, look at his face. What's changed? Well, his hair is shorter. He's dressed like a white man now. His skin is even turned white. Now, the reason for that is because he's not outside all day. He's not out there hunting and gathering like he used to. Notice he got a little bit fatter. He's a little chunkier. He's not as physically active, okay? So, Carlisle Boarding School did a lot to assimilate the Indians. By the way, this is the same guy too, if you look at him. 1, 2, 3, all the same man, okay? All right, that's it for this episode.